Okay, this video is called Journey to Better Health, and I want to make one point. This video comes from, I sometimes get asked by groups to give talks, and this was a group of middle-aged and older people who don't have any experience with nutrition and health. They're not in the healthcare field, so this is for beginners, okay? And also, this is Journey to Better Health. I don't want that to be confused with this book. I wrote a book called Journey to Optimal Health. This is actually an advanced book. And I've talked about it a little bit before, but we're not going to get into all the advanced stuff in there. This will be an introductory talk, and basically it was a total of 1 hour. I'm going to break it up into about 4 parts or so. People tell me they want me to make shorter videos. So it'll introduce things, but it's going to be a good introduction. I think you'd be surprised how much we cover pretty quickly here. Okay, so... And again, some of these you might have seen before, but I put them together in different ways to make it work for this particular talk. So I'm starting out with the idea of A Christmas Carol, the greatest novel ever written by Charles Dickens. You can read it in one weekend. It's only about 100 pages. It's magnificent. Okay, so for the beginning here, I'm like the ghost of Christmas future. You're like Scrooge, so to speak. And he has Scrooge seeing his grave into the future. And whether or not Scrooge changes his way, will he live a happy life and have left a good legacy versus just being an old miser jerk. All right, so anyways, here's a beautiful cover, and that's Bob Cratchit, the guy who worked for Scrooge, and his son, Tiny Tim. And Scrooge changed his ways, and Tiny Tim lived, and it's beautiful, okay? Now, the next thing here is, this is where you're at. Basically, like, you walk into a museum on a tourist vacation, and it says, you are here. Middle-aged, let's say, or older, whatever you are. And you got your two choices. You can be like the average chump, continue with the SAD diet or the Mediterranean diet, which I call the Antichrist diet. And then you'll get fat and sick. You'll be put on medications for diabetes, for hypertension. And like an idiot, you'll say, oh, it's under control. But you're really getting sicker and sicker. Drugs don't work. Surgery, chop, 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 bye-bye money, dead around 70 or so. Versus you can go the low-fat vegan route and avoid toxins, then you'll avoid the chronic Western diseases. And you got a good chance to make it 90. There's no guarantee, but you got much better odds. Okay, and basically to summarize it, this is what happens, and all the patients pretty much have the same disease, okay? They eat a high-fat diet, which sticks the red blood cells together, causes hypertension. High-fat diet also causes diabetes. High sodium also causes hypertension and diabetes. The hypertension and diabetes cause atherosclerosis, start plugging up arteries all over the place. In the heart, atrial fibrillation, myocardial infarction, cardiac angina, congestive heart failure. In the Johnson, impotence. In the brain, strokes, decreased cognitive function. Okay, in the eyes, go blind, lack of dietary fiber, you get abdominal pressure syndrome, all this stuff described by Dennis Burkitt, psychological stress, sleep deprivation, all those things contribute to hypertension and diabetes. And caffeine does as well. Okay, and then they don't filter their water, so they're exposed to a lot of toxins. That's a typical person I see. They're iron overloaded from eating processed food fortified with iron and from eating meat. They're sedentary, they don't exercise enough. And don't tell me you exercise, okay? I've had the experience of working in hospitals, and I can tell you in my experience, 99% of people do not walk the stairs. They take the elevator. They're lazy wimps, okay? And I know all the doctors, and not all the doctors I know, what percent take the stairs? It's about 1%, if that much, or like 1/10 of 1%. Hardly any of them do. Well, I'm just telling you, they're supposed to know better, and they don't, okay? And they all get the same diseases, like I just mentioned, plus fatty liver, which is part of diabetes. Sleep apnea is part of the same. Coronary artery disease, CAD, PAD, peripheral arterial disease in the legs. Okay, it's all kind of the same disease. And then they all, like a bunch of chumps, on their way to the slaughterhouse, drug, chop, chop, chop. They start getting stuff planted in their body, pacemakers, root canals, joint replacements, stents. Okay, why not just cure yourself easily with a low-fat vegan diet? And it ends up being painful. It ends up taking a lot of their money, wasting their time. It's a hassle going to the drugstore, going to all these doctor appointments. They're miserable. They have cognitive decline. They're stupid, and then they have an early death. That's what most people do. That's how most people age. That's the vast majority, like about 98%. Okay? I see this all day long, every day in all my years working in the hospital. I've been a doctor a long time, over 30 years. Okay, I'm 61 years old, by the way. I have no medical problems. I don't take any pills. Okay, this is what I said. This is the same thing with a little bit more information here. I call this God's way. You know, it's free. You have to buy food anyways. Why not buy healthy food? Okay? And it usually works, gives you the best possible odds. You know, get some sunshine, get your exercise, get your sleep, maintain your social relationships. Religious people are a lot healthier. Help other people. You get reward neurotransmitters, makes you happier. And this is man's way, all the drugs and surgery. It's very expensive, it's very painful, and it seldom works. Okay? These people usually, it's rare for them to age well. Here's the approximate aging curves. You know, you go on the SAD diet, you'll probably live to your 60s, but you're probably going to be, you know, fat, sick, often mentally slow by your late 40s, early 50s. You're not going to achieve much. You're not going to feel very good. Nobody's going to want to sleep with you because you're unattractive. You're so sick. When a person's sick and fat, that's unattractive, okay? Being healthy is a lot more attractive than being fat and sick, okay? And most people are fat and sick in America by late middle age and early older years. So it's easy to prevent it. Just eat low-fat vegan. You don't need a fancy diet. Just eat low-fat vegan. Low-fat vegans are skinny. Okay, here's Mediterranean diet, which is really a trick. That's what a lot of doctors do, and they're a little bit better off. But the Mediterranean diet's really pretty much of a joke. What does it forbid? It sort of forbids processed food. That's about it. It allows alcohol, oils, meats. Stupid. Okay, and here's low-fat vegan. You got a good chance to maintain yourself relatively fit up until about 80. You know, there's some variability in it, but in general, and you got a good chance to make it to 90, like Seventh-day Adventist study and stuff. The vegans were the healthiest. Okay, then I'll just mention here something from, remember, we'll go to Revelations first. So here's from the Bible, Revelations chapter 18, verse 23. For thy merchants were the powerful men of the earth, and by their sorceries were men deceived. The other word for sorcery is pharmakeia, pharmacology. The average chump thinks drugs are real and plants are fake. And the opposite is true. I can't tell you how many patients I've had. I start talking about nutrition or diet, and they roll their eyes at me like I'm some type of idiot because they know they have a good doctor, and their doctor told them they need a stent in their coronaries. They need open heart surgery. What would I know? Okay? And this is from the Odyssey of Odysseus, the smartest of the Greeks. After the Trojan War, when he was making his journey home, they were stranded on the island of the sorceress, the witch Circe, and his men were foolish enough to drink her potion, and she turned them into swine, okay? So, what does that remind you of with regard to conventional health care? Conventional health care turns people into cows, into cash cows for the medical system, because they have to take the pills every day the rest of their life. The system milks them like a cash cow. And I call the Mediterranean diet the Antichrist diet. It claims to provide salvation from health problems, but it does not. It actually leads to people getting sicker and sicker. They're allowed to eat all these animal foods and dairy and alcohol, completely stupid. And they end up, and it makes them feel like they tried improving their diet. Because the average fat, sick, and stupid person I talk to always tells me, oh, I eat pretty good, doc. Maybe not as good as you, but I eat pretty good. And I'm like, well, what do you typically have for dinner? And they go, well, usually some fish, a little bit of chicken, a little bit of olive oil. Yeah, as you can imagine, maybe a glass of wine. I'm just saying to myself, how pathetic. Okay. Yeah, and the typical thing will be they'll tell me, oh, it's genetic because their sisters are sick, their brothers are sick, they're all sick. So it couldn't be anything else but genetic. Yeah, right. It's nothing to do with the fact you all eat the same lousy diet. And I joke that basically what ends up happening is the typical patient is in what I would call the pit of doom. They have zero chance of getting better. The cure rate with conventional medicine for hypertension, for diabetes, for coronary artery disease, it's zero. For cerebral vascular disease, dementia, cognitive decline, it's zero. Okay, they never cure anybody. For autoimmune disease, zero. The patients take pills the rest of their life. It's a joke. And they call themselves the standard. The gold standard of healthcare, conventional medicine, allopathic medicine. It's a joke. They stink. They don't even know what they're doing. Okay, sorry, but they don't know what causes disease, and they don't know how to cure disease. And then the poor patient in the pit of doom is like, doctor, doctor, help me. And the doctor throws on a rope with drug number 1, drug number 2, drug number 3, drug number 4. The doctor doesn't tell him that the drugs don't work, okay? You can lower your cholesterol with a statin. Let's say get your cholesterol down to 140, but you're not going to be as healthy as a person who got their cholesterol down to 140 with a healthy diet, okay? They don't work as well, all right? You can lower your blood pressure with blood pressure pills, but you don't reduce the risk of stroke anywhere near as much as you do if you get your blood pressure back to normal just by eating a healthy diet. You're still probably going to have an abnormal sodium to potassium ratio, and that's going to cause problems for you. So the pit of doom, which is most people as AAs, are always in the pit of doom, and it's always raining on them. They're sad, they're frustrated, they don't know what to do. They're a bunch of conformist, functioning, illiterate, trusting proles. Whereas a smart prole says, you know what, screw that. None of them ever get better. I'm going to try to figure out how to get better. I know some people get better. I know there's healthy people in other countries. I've seen them. I know it's true. I'm going to learn about nutrition. I'm going to start walking. I'm going to get some sunshine. I'm going to ask my God to help me. I'm going to have a purpose in my life. With my time left on this planet, I'm going to help my kids. I'm going to try to make the world a better place. I'll be a better teacher. I'll be a better coach. I'll be better at whatever it is I do. I'll make sure I get my sleep every night. Okay. And like I said, the smart doctors will tell you, the patient has all the power to decide if they get better or not. They're the one that choose what they eat, if they get their sleep, how they manage their stress, if they avoid caffeine. The power is in the hands of the patients. They just don't realize it. Just like the old church wanted to say salvation is based on the church, the doctor wants to say health is based on them, but it's not. It's based on the individual. Okay, and again, the simple way to remember it is you want to live like Adam and Eve, but keep your indoor heating and plumbing. Genesis 1:29, then God said, behold, I have given you every plant which is upon the face of the earth, and every tree which has fruit, and it shall be food for you. Okay, beautiful painting there, Adam and Eve by Bruegel and Rubin. It's the best of the Adam and Eve paintings. Okay, and then we get the inevitable counter-argument by the average, cognitively impaired prole. They go, my uncle drank and smoked and slept with hookers, and he lived to be 90. And I'm like, you know what? You could take 100 blind people and ask them to cross a street, and a busy street, and some of them will make it, but that doesn't mean it's a good idea, okay? You want to give yourself the best possible chance, the best possible odds. Okay, the other thing, too, I run into is there's something called the Hollingsworth Concept, okay? This is Lita Hollingsworth. She worked with high IQ children, and she noticed something called a communication range, number of, we'll call them IQ points, within a given domain, let's say the domain of health and nutrition. All right, and she said if one person was like 30 or more IQ points ahead of the other in that domain, the person who's farther behind would often think the person who's talking at a higher level for that given domain was being weird or strange or awkward or autistic or something, okay? And so what I'm trying to say is when you're new to something, you'll get better at it with time, but just give it a try. I would say try low-fat vegan for a couple months. If you're taking any medicines for diabetes, for hypertension, or for anticoagulation, let your doctor know because you're going to have to titrate your doses differently. Your blood pressure is going to drop, your sugars are going to drop, so you got to make sure you reduce your dosages on those things so you could pass out. Okay, it's a big deal. But what I'm trying to say is just recognize you don't know much, because in my experience, the average person who doesn't know anything about nutrition or disease thinks they actually know a lot. They've been eating all their life, so they think they know something about food, but they don't. The number of people who actually know about the low-fat vegan diet, it's like 1 in 10,000, okay? It's actually not that complicated, but so few have ever made the effort to study it. And what I see most of the time, there was Cassandra, was the prophetess of Troy. She had, Apollo had made advances upon her. She rejected the advances, and Apollo gave her this gift that was a bit of a curse, that she could prophesy the future correctly, but that no one would listen to her. And she told Paris, do not bring Helen to Troy. It will bring disaster upon Troy, but no one listened to her. And then when the Greeks, after 10 years of war with the Greeks, they pretended they were leaving, and they brought the Trojan Horse up to the walls of Troy. She said, do not bring it into Troy. It will lead to the destruction of Troy, but no one listened to her. Okay, so anyways, that's what I feel like. I talk to all these fat, sick people, including my relatives, and they always give me this, oh, well, that's not realistic. You're like a robot. I would rather die than stop eating meat, all this stupid stuff. And I hear that from doctors in my family, some of them, okay? They don't phrase it quite like that, but that's about what they say. Okay, so anyways, that's the painting of Cassandra, the prophetess of Troy. Okay, so here's the Trojan horse brought outside the walls of Troy. And then the Trojans had their boats leaving. So, I'm sorry, the Greeks left with their boats, sailed away. So the Trojans thought, yes, they surrendered. Now they want an offering of goodwill, of peace. And they foolishly brought it into the gates of Troy. And then at night, the Greeks came out. They opened up the gates, and the other Greeks had sailed back to the shore in the darkness, and they sacked Troy. And that was the end of Troy. Okay, so beware of Greeks even when bearing gifts. All right. Beware of the Paleo Keto diet. It is for chumps. It's based on nothing but nonsense. One of the things you'll notice is, remember Cicero, the greatest lawyer in all of Rome? What did he say? He said, when you have no other supporting evidence for your case, abuse the plaintiff. So start insulting them. It's called an ad hominem approach to argument and debate. So they'll say, oh, you know, you vegans, you're crazy, you're weak, you're sick, what you're saying is wrong, blah, 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 blah. They just insult you because they have nothing. And then they say epidemiology is bogus. They say all those other studies, they're all bogus. They all, you know, it's because the support for a low-fat vegan diet, it's overwhelming, okay? And watch out for the high-fat phonies, too. They're trying to promote this moderate fat routine. No. I'm going to show you a little bit about processed food. Basically, they're processed food companies. They got billions of dollars. They do research. They bring in a cohort of people from the general public, and they give them variations of the food. They add a little more sugar, a little more salt, other chemicals to get the right texture, the right mouthfeel, monosodium glutamate, manufacturer-free glutamate, same thing, just glutamate, okay? High fructose corn syrup, sweeten it up some more, a little bit of fat, fry it or something. And it tastes good. It's hyper palatable. And they figure out what's the bliss point that they like the absolute most, or most likely to become addicted to it or to buy it. So those foods are chemically designed to make you feel good when you're eating them, or to taste good when you're eating them. But they make you feel sick later. Your body's not made to process this modern fake food. It makes you sick. There's no fiber in it. It's high in sodium. It's full of preservatives, mold inhibitors that are mitochondrial inhibitors, estrogenic chemicals like atrazine, glyphosate. All those are mitochondrial inhibitors. Glyphosate, the atrazine, the mold inhibitors, and the estrogenic chemicals are sometimes inhibitors as well in mitochondria, and they also tend to cause obesity. They're fat storage hormones. Some of them are goitrogenic. Processed food's a disaster. You don't want to ever eat it. As you get older, you get more fragile, so you have to be more careful about your health, or you end up in the fat, sick, and stupid crowd like most people, and you don't want to be in that crowd. Okay, because the once you're in the fat, sick, and stupid crowd, you'll probably never get out of it, because then they sort of lost that zest for life, and they just are like mopes. Oh yeah, okay. You know, they can find their way home, but they've lost their zip and energy for any type of sophisticated thinking or, you know, impressive behavior. Impressive behavior means, yes, I will try this for 3 months. Oh my gosh, I got better. Yeah, I'll go with this. I'll continue it. Okay, so manufacturer-free glutamate just means you take a protein, which is like a necklace, a string of amino acids, and you process it. You pasteurize it. You can extract things from it, hydrolyze it, whatever. All these things break up the individual amino acids, and you free up the individual glutamates. And these are manufactured. It's a manufacturing process, and it frees up the glutamate, MFG, manufactured-free glutamate. And those now can bind to receptors in your mouth and your digestive tract, and they activate reward neurotransmitters, because our ancestors long ago worried about starvation, and for them to find a good protein source, that was a positive thing. So reward transmitters are activated to make them remember that moment and go back to that spot. And this stuff makes things taste good. It can make stale food taste good, but it's not good for your health. And in the modern world, they put tons of it into the food, and it's also a brain excitotoxin, because it's present in excessive amounts rather than the individual small amounts where it can be slowly absorbed and sequestered. When it comes in as a bolus, you can't sequester it effectively, and you get a high blood level. Okay, and then just to, just teach you like what reality is, here's one of the Harvard textbooks of pathophysiology of heart disease, cardiovascular medicine. And it's like, the hallowed halls of Harvard, MGH, Massachusetts General Hospital. They say MGH means man's greatest hospital, okay? I did some of my training there, okay? And I can tell you this, The guys at Harvard that writes a textbook, they're a joke. They're like a bunch of clowns from the 1700s doing phlebotomy for all the different diseases. And I say that not based on lack of understanding. I say that based on extensive understanding. Medical students to this day, it is the year 2025, okay? It's May 2025. They will tell you that they've been taught that 95% of hypertension is idiopathic, meaning the doctor's an idiot, the patient's pathetic, of unknown cause. They also call it essential hypertension. No one knows. And then the other 5% are things like renal artery stenosis from atherosclerosis, pheochromocytoma tumor of the adrenal gland that secretes catecholamine hormones, adrenaline, and all that stuff, noradrenaline. That's all BS. So they go, sometimes it's socioeconomic disparity. Oh, isn't that terrible? Sometimes it's due to aging. And sometimes it's genetic. And you go, well, gee, isn't that thoughtful? No, it's horseshit. Okay, and they say the same thing about all the chronic Western diseases. And it's absolute horseshit. Okay, people who eat plant-based diets, they don't get hypertensive whatever age they are. Okay, and they're cheap diets. You know, a poor person could eat these things. Most of all these people with no high blood pressure, they're a bunch of, you know, backward-ass, primitive illiterates, okay? They just eat plant foods. They're not wealthy people protected from the harshness of the world, okay? They're poor people who eat plant foods. You don't need money, you don't need brains, you don't need to be literate. All you have to do is eat the plant foods, whoever you are, whatever your genetics, and you don't get hypertension, okay? That's what the epidemiology shows. And that's why Paleo Keto Carnivore Low Carb hates it, because it shows what a joke Paleo Keto Carnivore Low Carb is, all right? So here's one example of the Yanomamo. They live in the Amazon jungle of South America on the borders of Venezuela and Brazil, okay? And these guys don't look like they know how to read, okay? Probably the main way they die is fighting with the other groups out there, okay? But they don't get hypertension. They don't get hypertension even as they get older if they make it that far without all their local feuds. Okay, and it's the same with the other plant-based populations. So that's what I'm trying to say is, if you hung around with this guy, you would never cure your hypertension, all the Harvard doctors. If you hang around with the Yanomamo, your hypertension will be gone within a week. Okay, now here is the map of the Tarahumara. Tarahumara are people in Mexico. They live in northern Mexico in the Sierra Madre Mountains. Sierra means like a saw, like the teeth of a saw, the mountains that go up and down. So it's a mountain range, not just one mountain, but a range of them. In Copper Canyon area. Okay, they don't have cars. They run around all the time. They eat plant foods, lots and lots of corn, some beans, some local greens. Anyways, they're world famous ultra marathoners. They have a holiday once a year where all the guys in town can run 100 miles in like one day. All right, the women run 50 miles in a day. Okay, and every guy does it, not just the fast guy. The Pima were combined with them in the past, but Mexican-American War, 1848, separated them. The Pima are now in Arizona. They eat the sad diet. They have tremendous, ubiquitous obesity. So basically, take your pick. Okay, if you go down the path of the Pima, eating the standard American diet or a version of the Mediterranean diet, fat, sick, diabetes, get your toes amputated, your foot amputated, your leg amputated, coronary artery disease, get open heart surgery, CABG, coronary artery bypass graft, CABG, cataracts, go blind, gallstones from the high cholesterol. 95% of gallstones are cholesterol gallstones. Lack of dietary fiber with all that processed food, you get appendicitis in a high amounts. Because of the lack of fiber, you get diverticulosis, leading to diverticulitis, sigmoid resection, take out that part of the colon, surgery. Coronary artery disease, often end up with a pacemaker. Thyroid disease, thyroidectomy, okay. And you have lack of energy, TBI, total body ischemia. Okay, you really want that? Why not be like the Tarahumara, run 100 miles in 2 days? They got great fitness. I want to be like the Tarahumara. I don't want to be like the Pima. Nathan Pritikin was so impressed by the Tarahumara, he patterned his diet after them. Okay? Basically, if you eat this way, you can be physically healthy and fit and energetic and keep your brains for a long time. You got a very good chance to make it to 80 or longer with an intact brain and some physical fitness and strength, rather than being, a chronic patient with endless complaints. Why wouldn't you want to be healthy? And just to show you, here's all these mitochondrial inhibitors. And I knew that fat, especially saturated fats, an inhibitor of intermitochondrial membrane electron transport. The mitochondria make about 80% of the energy in the body, okay? So you want your mitochondria to work well. It's what it's all about, okay? Without mitochondria, there is no such thing as a multicellular organism, okay? You need them, okay? And basically in a cell, when the mitochondria die, the cell dies. It goes into apoptosis because it knows it can't live without mitochondria to make energy, to make ATP. So some years ago, I knew there had to be more mitochondria inhibitors, and I said, because I read about sat, fat, and a few other things, and I said, you know what, it's time I make sure I understand mitochondria inhibitors. So I own a whole bunch of biochemistry books. I went through all my biochem books. There was nothing in them. In college, I was going to be a biochemist at one time. I was strongly considering that, and I collected all these biochems. I actually minored initially in chemistry at Stanford, but then I hated synthetic lab. I had to have a sensitive nose, and I didn't like synthetic lab. It smelled like paint. So I said, screw this, and I stopped being so heavily into chemistry. But I was into it, and I always found it elegant and intellectually beautiful. So anyways, the point I'm making is there was nothing in all of the college and med school biochemistry textbooks and the nutrition biochemistry textbooks. So I had to go into the literature, scientific literature. I quickly found 20, then 30, then 40, then 50, then 60, now 70 mitochondrial inhibitors. And wait till you see how common these are. Have you ever heard of statins for the treatment of cholesterol? Mitochondrial inhibitor. Have you ever heard of selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors for the treatment of depression? Haldol for the treatment of schizophrenia, antipsychotic drugs. Also tricyclic antidepressants for depression, things like, amitriptyline, for example. How about antibiotics? Beta-lactam penicillins, fluoroquinolones, aminoglycosides. Common stuff, as well as the tetracyclines. How about hypertensive drugs like beta blockers? They're mitochondrial inhibitors. How about diabetes drugs like metformin? It's a mitochondrial inhibitor. How about pain drugs like Tylenol? Mitochondrial inhibitor. How about general anesthesia? Mitochondrial inhibitor. Fluoxetine, Prozac, SSRI, mitochondrial inhibitor. How about propofol, the sedative, mitochondrial inhibitor? How about processed food, antifungals, mold inhibitors, mitochondrial inhibitors? How about alcohol, mitochondrial inhibitor? How about the heavy metals, lead, cadmium, iron, aluminum, mitochondrial inhibitors? How about anti-seizure meds? Yeah, they're mitochondrial inhibitors. How about omega-6 cooking oils? They're toxic aldehyde byproducts like hydroxynonenal, H&E, mitochondrial inhibitors. How about unfiltered water? F- and aluminum. Those are mitochondrial inhibitors. So what I'm saying is the average poor bastard is exposed to 5 or 10 of these and they don't even know it. How are you going to be a high-energy, sharp-witted person if your energy system is blocked in 5 or 10 spots? You're being nickeled and dimed to death, and you're just too ignorant to realize it. So now that you know, you can avoid these things. If you're walking down the street and a car's coming towards you, you jump out of the way. But if the car is invisible, how do you get out of the way? Well, here, I've made the car visible. Don't eat non-organic corn because it's going to have glyphosate on there, a mitochondrial inhibitor. Don't eat non-organic corn is going to have atrazine on there. Non-organic soy is going to have glyphosate on there. They're both mitochondrial inhibitors. Don't drink stuff out of BPA containers. It's a mitochondrial inhibitor. Okay? There it is. Okay? It's pretty obvious. And there's more of them. I mean, I don't like, people tell me, oh, flax is a wonderful food. BS, okay? It's got cyanogenic glycosides in there. I don't want that. Other people say, oh, cyanocobalamin's okay. It only has a little cyano in it. You know what cyano is? Okay, you know what? Nide, okay? You don't want that, all right? I worry it's going to add up. What about almonds? Yeah, they got some of that in too. So a lot of stupid people, they're eating almonds and flax and cyano B12. Good luck ingesting all that. I worry if some of that's going to accumulate in your body. I wouldn't eat that stuff ever. Okay? And the big new preservative, the AP and then you know what? Additional letters and then the E and then the E and then the L. Would you eat that crap? Go look up the manufacturer data safety sheets on that. It's listed as a fungal inhibitor. Wait till you look it up. You'll be amazed at the contaminants allowed in there. You'll be amazed at them, okay? And one of them is related to the things we just talk about in here, okay? I would never eat that stuff. Aspirin, nonsteroidal anti-inflammatories, okay? These are common things. Tramadol, pain medicine, okay? I let you know that because then you realize you're not going to win the game with all these medications that Poison your mitochondria. Okay? What's the cause of aging and death? Damage to the mitochondria. What's the cause of cancer? Damage to the mitochondria. What's the cause of diabetes? Damage to the mitochondria. So how are you going to become healthier by taking a bunch of medications that poison your mitochondria? That's the point I'm telling you. Man's way is stupid. Okay? And if you fall for it, you're a chump.